the Fed decided to keep the federal funds rate at 5.5%, then the decrease reserve need to be from how much is it? 38 billion to 20 billion, almost 18 billion reserve need to decrease, and the Fed can decrease this 8 billion of reserves, 18 billion of reserves by selling bonds. Is it clear? Let's see. So the Fed can use open market operation to purchase or selling reserve if demand for reserves changes. It will not go away, isn't it?
What's your channel called?
Anyway, the federal funds market increase reserve by purchasing bonds, decrease reserve by selling bonds, and this can only happen if the member banks' demand for reserve increases. The Fed can conduct open market operation to purchase bonds, and if the demand for federal funds or the reserve decreases by the member bank, the Fed can sell bonds through open market operation to keep the target. So let's see what we have in our book.
It's quite a delay.
When you hear about monetary policy in the news, chances are the reporter is talking about the federal funds rate. The federal funds rate is the interest rate that banks pay one another for borrowing reserves or federal funds overnight so they can meet the reserve requirements set by the Federal Reserve. As in other markets, there is a supply and demand for reserves that interact to produce an equilibrium price, in this case, an interest rate. Let's investigate the federal funds market by drawing a graph with the federal funds rate on the vertical axis and the quantity of reserves on the horizontal. The demand for reserves, labeled DFF, slopes downward. At high interest rates, the opportunity cost of borrowing funds rises, so banks will be less willing to borrow reserves. The opposite is true for low interest rates. The supply of federal funds, labeled SFF, is a little different. It's flat. That's because when the Fed's Open Market Committee decides on a target for the federal funds rate, it commits to buy and sell bonds through open market operations to maintain the target. So if the Federal Reserve sets its target at 5% and quantity demanded is $40 billion, then the Fed will buy and sell bonds to make sure that there is $40 billion worth of reserves available. If demand increases by $20 billion, shifting the demand curve to the right from DFF to DFF1, then the Fed will buy bonds in the open market. When the Fed buys a bond, it pays for it with new money that it deposits in the bank account of whoever owns the bond, which creates additional reserves. In this case, it buys $20 billion in bonds, increasing the quantity of reserves supplied from $40 billion to $60 billion, thus keeping the federal funds rate stable at 5%.
So if the demand for federal funds increases, the Fed will do what? How the Fed can conduct this demand for reserves? What they will do? The demand for reserves increases. Buy bonds or sell bonds? Buy bonds. Yes. Because whenever the demand for reserve increases, Fed will use open market operation to purchase bonds from the public. Okay.
If instead the demand for reserves falls by $10 billion, shifting demand to the left from DFF to DFF2, The Fed will reduce the quantity of reserves in the market by selling bonds. When the Fed sells bonds, it debits the bank account of whoever bought the bond, reducing the reserves held by banks. In this case, the Fed sells $10 billion in bonds, reducing the quantity of reserves supplied from the original $40 billion to $30 billion. As before, the federal funds rate stays fixed at 5%. The federal funds rate helps determine other interest rates in the economy and potentially real GDP. By establishing and maintaining a target for the federal funds rate, the Fed can stabilize this important interest rate at a level it feels is needed to maintain stable prices and economic growth. The Fed can also use the federal funds rate as a tool of monetary policy to influence economic activity. We'll investigate how in another video.
Now we will do some work examples while we have to figure it out. If demand for reserve increases, then what Federal Reserve will do to keep 4% target interest rate for the increased demand for reserve. Okay? Suppose the Federal Reserve has established a 4% target for the federal funds and the initial equilibrium is shown in the graph below. What is the equilibrium quantity of reserve in the federal funds market? Again, can see that? What's that? What is the equilibrium federal funds rate? Not rate, funds. Huh?
4.
Sorry? 4% is the federal funds rate, but what is the quantity of reserve? Yeah. Sorry, my mistake. I said federal funds rate. Now, the question you have to answer.
You have 4 subscribers.
Worry of the future economic condition, banks lend fewer funds to their customers, keeping larger fraction of their deposit as reserve. This condition will increase or decrease demand for reserve.
Put something to out.
If I have to pull a little bit out of that. So, if something happens, like people are scared of future condition of the economy, then what will happen to the demand for reserve by the bank?
It'll raise because the banks will borrow less.
Is it?
So less people they borrow.
Because banks lend fewer funds, funds to the customers. If banks lend fewer funds, then what will happen? Increased demand or decreased demand for reserve? They already have excess reserve, but they are not giving loan to the customers. Decrease. The curve will shift to the left, guys. So, if the demand for reserve decrease in the federal funds market, by how much from this graph? The quantity of reserve decreased by how much? 1. So, if the demand for reserve decrease, if Fed decided to keep the federal funds rate at 4%, what they will do? Purchase bonds or sell bonds?
Purchase.
Sell, decrease or contract money supply through decreasing reserve. Okay. Now the second option, people unexpectedly withdraw more funds from their bank accounts by decreasing level of reserves held by the banks. If this happens, then what will happen? What will be the demand for reserve? Increase.
So you'll buy more.
Buy bonds. Yeah. Now the question is how much you have to buy bonds from this. If the demand for reserve increase and shift to the right, the Fed will purchase how much as a reserve?